go. There's been a couple of reports this week in relation to the coronation.
We're quite emotional, actually. The news broke as we were walking through Parliament Square.
Across Britain, the expectation is palpable. In cafes near Westminster and on the front pages of Sunday supplements, a single idea is gaining momentum. King William V will define the monarchy of the 21st century. Today, all eyes turn to Windsor not for mourning, but for renewal. Just days after being blessed at Westminster Abbey by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Princess Catherine and Prince William made their first public appearance in what royal insiders are calling the dawn of the dual reign. The blessing, witnessed by senior royals and state leaders, marked a decisive new chapter for the monarchy. King Charles III, now under medical supervision and resting at Sandringham, has officially transferred day-to-day royal duties to his son and daughter-in-law. The Archbishop's benediction was more than ceremonial. It was a signal of continuity, stability, and trust. Standing beneath the same vaulted arches where Charles was crowned 2 years earlier, the Archbishop spoke words that resonated across the kingdom. As this crown passes through hands of service, may it rest upon hearts of duty. It was Princess Anne, however, who delivered the moment that history will remember. In a graceful, deliberate motion, she stepped forward to present Catherine with the newly commissioned Queen Consort's crown, created by Gerard & Co., the jeweler synonymous with the royal lineage since 1735. The piece, adorned with Burmese rubies, sapphires, and diamonds from the late Queen Elizabeth's private collection, symbolized not only legitimacy but earned respect. A palace statement confirmed that two versions of the crown were made. The primary crown, secured in the Tower of London's Jewel House, to be used for major coronations and state ceremonies, and a lighter, ceremonial crown, designed for royal events and symbolic engagements, the one Catherine wore briefly during her blessing. After the ceremony, as the Abbey bells rang across London, the princess's calm composure became the subject of public fascination. She wasn't just receiving a crown, one observer said. She was accepting a nation's trust. Hours later, the newly blessed couple arrived at Windsor Castle for their first walkabout as future king and queen. Thousands gathered along the long walk, waving flags and carrying flowers, many wearing badges that read, "For the future, William and Catherine." The air was charged with anticipation, yet remarkably tender. William led the way, his demeanor a blend of duty and humility, while Catherine, now wearing a simple dove-gray coat and the smaller version of her crown, greeted well-wishers with poised warmth. Children handed her handwritten cards. An elderly veteran whispered, "God bless the new queen," and Catherine responded softly, "God bless the king." It was a walk that symbolized far more than ceremony. It was transition, a visible shift of authority and emotion. Behind the smiles, palace aides acknowledged the significance. "This is no regency," one said. "It's a co-stewardship." Notably absent from the walkabout was Queen Camilla. Sources close to Clarence House suggested she had chosen to remain at Raymil House, her private retreat, citing a need for reflection. Yet her absence did not go unnoticed. As one commentator put it, if Westminster crowned a new spirit, Windsor revealed who truly carries it. The public response was immediate. Hashtags like #blessing of the future, #crown of Catherine, and #Anne the anchor trended across social media platforms. Many lauded Princess Anne for her role as the monarchy's moral compass. The sister who ensured duty triumphed over ego. Among the crowd, emotions ran high. A woman from Nottingham told reporters, "It feels like the monarchy has come full circle from duty to devotion, from legacy to living values." And for me, royal insiders described the event as meticulously planned yet emotionally spontaneous. The couple's decision to walk unaccompanied by heavy security was deliberate signaling, openness, and confidence. William, at one point, knelt to accept a bouquet from a child and placed it at the base of the King Charles III memorial oak near the gates, a symbolic gesture of loyalty and continuity. As Catherine looked on, her expression reflected quiet strength, a woman aware that her every step was being recorded for history. The cameras caught a brief, emotional exchange between her and Princess Anne, who joined them near the end of the walk. The two women clasped hands, no words, just acknowledgement. Observers noted that in this subtle moment, the monarchy's next era found its soul. The broadcast coverage from BBC, Sky, and ITV echoed a common sentiment. This is not a coronation, it's a consecration. Behind palace walls, however, not everyone shared the same serenity. Queen Camilla's allies privately questioned the pace of transition. One courtier, speaking on condition of anonymity, said, "Her Majesty gave decades of service to steady the throne, and yet, in a matter of days, history has rewritten itself." Still, public opinion appears unmoved. In the latest YouGov poll, 84% of Britons said the blessing was timely and wise, while approval for Catherine reached its highest level since 2022. Internationally, the images of her bowing before Princess Anne before the crown's presentation went viral, described by CNN as the defining royal image of the decade. As the sun set over Windsor's copper rooftops, the bells tolled again, not for loss, but for legacy renewed. And so, with a calm wave and a silent nod, William and Catherine turned toward the castle gates, not as heirs waiting for destiny, but as leaders already living it. The morning after the Westminster blessing, the mood inside Buckingham Palace was anything but uniform. The images of Princess Anne placing the Gerard crown upon Catherine's head had already circled the globe, but inside the royal residence, they carried a different weight, one that blurred the boundaries between ceremony and succession. At the heart of this quiet storm was Queen Camilla. Though the palace had announced she would step back temporarily to support the king's recovery, few expected her complete absence from both the Abbey and the Windsor walkabout. Royal aides were careful with language, describing her retreat to Raymell House as a period of private reflection. Yet sources close to her circle suggested the decision cut deeper. It was about being written out of history in real time. Camilla watched the service from Raymell, one confidant revealed. She was moved by Anne's words, but she couldn't ignore what it symbolized, a public acknowledgement that Catherine had become the monarchy's moral center. In the days following the ceremony, palace protocol teams quietly shifted reporting lines. The communications unit, which had once answered jointly to Buckingham and Clarence House, was now operating directly under the office of the Prince and Princess of Wales. It was described as a temporary measure to ensure continuity, but to royal observers, it was a constitutional earthquake. King Charles, still undergoing specialist treatment at Sandringham, reportedly approved the changes, though insiders insist it was Princess Anne who persuaded him to formalize the transition. Anne told her brother, said one insider, "You can rest, Charles. They're ready." That simple phrase, "they're ready," has since defined the new royal season. Meanwhile, Catherine's calendar filled instantly. Within 48 hours of the blessing, she hosted an informal luncheon for Commonwealth youth ambassadors at Kensington Palace. There were no crowns, no trumpets, only discussions on education and innovation. The message was unmistakable. A queen in waiting doesn't have to wait to lead. Public reaction mirrored that of the international press. The Times of London described her as the people's diplomat, calm, credible, and quietly unstoppable. In the Middle East, newspapers hailed her earlier work on intercultural dialogue as the reason Britain's new royal era had moral clarity. Yet, inside the palace, unease persisted. Camilla's private secretary, Fiona Shelburne, resigned just days after the blessing, citing restructuring. Aides who had served both households now found themselves reassigned to Kensington. "It's like the ground is moving," one staffer admitted. Everything that once flowed through Clarence House now flows through Adelaide Cottage. Princess Anne, meanwhile, emerged as the unexpected architect of stability. She visited Charles twice that week, delivering updates personally, emphasizing the unity of the family. When asked by a reporter outside Windsor whether the changes were permanent, Anne replied with her trademark bluntness, "The crown doesn't wait for comfort, it waits for courage." That quote, dominated headlines and unintentionally widened the contrast between Anne's forthrightness and Camilla's silence. During this same week, Camilla's friends hinted to select journalists that she remained the king's loyal companion and had no intention of fading away. But even her allies struggled to defend the optics. With Catherine leading state engagements and William now chairing the weekly Privy Council briefings, Camilla's influence had visibly receded. Inside royal circles, whispers began of a dual monarchy by duty, one that would see William and Catherine sharing stewardship while Charles lived in retreat. Historians noted this as unprecedented in modern times, though technically permissible under constitutional flexibility. The Archbishop of Canterbury himself addressed the nation in a televised reflection. "A blessing is not a coronation, but in faith, a blessing prepares hearts for what must one day come." Those words, interpreted as quiet endorsement, further reinforced public belief that the throne's future had effectively shifted. Meanwhile, Catherine continued to demonstrate her blend of discipline and empathy. She was photographed leaving Westminster Abbey for an unannounced visit to a children's hospice the same day the palace confirmed she would preside over the upcoming Commonwealth Youth Forum alongside Princess Anne. Commentators drew a stark parallel. Camilla, the queen by title, unseen and unheard. Catherine, the queen by spirit, everywhere that mattered. Still, those closest to the king insist he bears no resentment, only gratitude. "He feels pride," one longtime courtier said. He told Anne, "Let her shine." That's what your mother would have wanted. But the quiet truth was clear. Power, once delicate and shared, was now settling into new hands. And as Catherine and William prepared for their next engagement, a symbolic walk through the gardens of Sandringham to meet local volunteers, the royal narrative had already turned a page. The age of the consort was closing. The age of the crowned companion was beginning. The afternoon sun cast a golden hue over the gardens of Sandringham as the royal motorcade arrived, greeted by quiet applause and waves of Union Jack flags. It was the first time the public had seen William and Catherine since the Westminster blessing, and their appearance carried the full weight of transition. King Charles, resting privately inside the estate under medical supervision, was not expected to attend. Yet his presence seemed to hover over every detail, from the arrangement of white roses at the gates to the subtle chime of bells from the local parish. The scene was not about farewell, but stewardship. William and Catherine stepped out together, both dressed in understated navy. The visual message was unmistakable: solidarity, discipline, and shared purpose. No grand coach, no fanfare. Just two figures walking down the familiar path once graced by the late Queen Elizabeth II, acknowledging the crowds with gentle smiles. The couple had come to meet local volunteers, those who had served quietly behind the scenes during the King's recent health retreat. But the gathering became far more than a thank you. It became a moment of recognition that the next generation of leadership had fully arrived. As the crowd pressed closer, Catherine knelt to speak to an elderly gardener who had tended Sandringham's grounds for over 5 decades. He handed her a small bouquet of white lilies and whispered, "For His Majesty, with prayers." She smiled, touched his hand, and replied softly, "He feels your prayers every day." Oh, nearby, William paused to shake hands with a group of young scouts, telling them, "The best service is the kind you do when no one's watching." Cameras captured the sincerity in his expression and the unspoken truth that both he and Catherine were no longer waiting to rule. They were already doing so. Inside the main hall, an intimate reception followed, attended by senior aides and Princess Anne, who has become the invisible architect of this royal realignment. Her presence was commanding yet warm. She moved with the quiet authority of someone who had seen history bend and knew exactly when to steady it. At one point, Anne raised a glass and spoke briefly, her words later repeated across every news network. "The crown is not a gift, it's a relay. And those who carry it must never run for glory, only for grace." The remark drew an emotional nod from Catherine, who later told reporters, "Princess Anne's blessing means more than she'll ever know. Her guidance has anchored us through change." That evening, as twilight fell over the Norfolk countryside, Catherine hosted a small round table with representatives from the Royal Foundation, the British Council, and the Commonwealth Secretariat. The focus: cultural diplomacy in a changing world. It was a project she and William had drafted privately months earlier, but its timing now felt prophetic. Under this initiative, Catherine proposed a new framework for soft power, moving away from lavish banquets and symbolic gifts toward partnerships built on education, sustainability, and shared heritage. Aides later confirmed that her ideas would feed directly into next year's Commonwealth Youth Forum, which she and Anne will co-chair. Political observers noted that this vision bore the fingerprints of her earlier diplomacy, the same careful reasoning she used when she declined the Saudi diamond necklace months prior. One commentator on Sky News described her as the monarchy's moral compass, the queen of the modern conscience. But not everyone inside palace walls viewed the transformation with enthusiasm. At Clarence House, Queen Camilla remained unseen but not unheard. Sources said she was quietly reviewing her charitable portfolios and reassigning several key advisors. Some described her demeanor as frosted calm, others called it strategic retreat. "She feels displaced," admitted one insider. This isn't how she imagined the twilight of her royal life, watching another woman ascend, not through scandal or ambition, but through quiet, relentless service. Meanwhile, King Charles was briefed daily by Princess Anne, who reportedly showed him photos of the Sandringham walkabout. "He smiled when he saw them," said a courtier. He told Anne, "They understand the people. That's what matters now." The palace later released a single photograph: William and Catherine walking hand in hand along the garden path, framed by blooming roses and the distant outline of the royal chapel. The caption read simply, "Continuity in grace." End of tale. Public reaction was swift and overwhelming. Newspapers across Europe praised the couple's poise. Le Figaro called it a new rhythm of royalty, softer, steadier, and more sincere. Even in the United States, major outlets ran features on the woman redefining the crown. The tone within Britain was equally admiring. Editorials in The Guardian and The Times spoke of a monarchy that listens again. Polls showed that 86% of respondents approved of Catherine's new diplomatic direction, with many describing her as the rightful bridge between tradition and tomorrow. Yet beneath the grace and ceremony, a quieter story was unfolding, one of succession, strategy, and survival. Palace insiders hinted that Charles's convalescence might extend indefinitely, effectively granting William and Catherine full operational authority. Official statements avoided the word regency, but privately, officials admitted that the reality speaks for itself. For now, the family's unity rests upon an unspoken pact, one safeguarded by Anne, sustained by Catherine, and accepted by Charles. But for Camilla, that pact means exile in plain sight. Her title remains untouched, yet her throne, symbolic and spiritual, has already been passed on. And as the car carrying William and Catherine departed Sandringham under the glow of sunset, one line from a BBC correspondent summed up the day perfectly. The crown is no longer waiting on time. It has already found its moment. In the week following the Sandringham visit, the palace confirmed what many already sensed: Princess Catherine and Princess Anne would co-chair the Commonwealth Youth Forum in London. The announcement came not from Clarence House or even Buckingham, but from the office of the Prince and Princess of Wales, now officially recognized as the monarchy's executive branch for public diplomacy. It was the clearest sign yet that real power had shifted. For Catherine, this was more than an appointment. It was a coronation in spirit. After months of careful preparation and years of quiet work, she now stood as the defining figure of Britain's moral diplomacy, the face of a monarchy ready to earn, not demand, respect. The forum's theme, shared purpose in a divided world, was chosen personally by Catherine. Royal aides revealed that she had drafted the phrase late one evening at Adelaide Cottage, writing by hand before sending it to Princess Anne for approval. Anne's response was brief but telling: "Perfect. It's what we've needed for years." In private, the two women have become the monarchy's unshakable axis. Anne, the seasoned warrior of duty. Catherine, the modern architect of connection. Their partnership is viewed inside the palace as the stabilizing force that allows King Charles to rest and allows William to govern. Behind the scenes, preparations for the Youth Forum were intense. Catherine insisted on an agenda that blended diplomacy and conscience. Panels on women's education, youth innovation, and climate resilience replaced the traditional state dinners and ceremonial speeches. She even reached out to the Royal Institute of International Affairs to bring in scholars from Ghana, Singapore, and Canada for discussion panels. "She's rewriting what royal leadership looks like," remarked a senior Foreign Office official. "It's no longer about ribbons and handshakes. It's about policy and purpose." Meanwhile, the visual symbol of that shift, the Gerard Queen Consort crown, continued to capture global attention. The jeweler released a statement confirming that the smaller version, the Crown of Service, was crafted from recycled platinum and set with stones donated by Commonwealth nations. Catherine's request for ethical sourcing had redefined an object once reserved for opulence. But if Catherine's rise was graceful, Camilla's withdrawal was growing impossible to disguise. The Queen Consort's team at Raymill confirmed she had cancelled 2 domestic charity events and postponed her appearance at the Royal Osteoporosis Society's annual gala. When asked by a reporter if she planned to attend the Commonwealth Forum, a palace spokesperson offered a careful response. "Her Majesty continues to support the forum's objectives and sends her blessings." And inside royal circles, that phrasing, "sends her blessings," was decoded as confirmation of absence. "She's aware the stage has shifted," said a longtime royal commentator. "But it's not spite, it's survival." Camilla knows the optics of standing beside Catherine now would make her seem peripheral. And in royal politics, invisibility is often the first step toward history's margins. Still, not everyone viewed the changes as a quiet revolution. Prince William, determined to keep unity, privately visited his stepmother before the forum preparations began. The meeting, held at Raymill House, was described by insiders as civil but somber. William reportedly told her, "You'll always have a place, but the world needs renewal." Camilla's reply was curt, almost weary. "Renewal comes for us all, William. Just remember, it never asks permission." Okay, those words echoed through the press later that week after being leaked to the Daily Telegraph. Commentators interpreted them as both resignation and warning, a final acknowledgement that the new power dynamic was irreversible. In contrast, Catherine's focus remained entirely forward-looking. She commissioned a short film to open the Commonwealth Forum, a montage of voices from across the globe, narrated by youth leaders instead of royals. The closing line, which Catherine personally approved, read, "Leadership is not about who stands above, but who stands beside." It became an instant viral moment. Social media lit up with praise for the princess's humility, while newspapers across Africa and the Caribbean framed it as the people's crown moment. Behind closed doors, even the king was said to be moved. Princess Anne later told aides that Charles had watched the preview and remarked softly, "She understands what I tried to begin, only now it will actually endure." By the time the official Commonwealth Forum invitations were sent, it was clear that Catherine's influence had crossed a threshold. For the first time, international ambassadors were instructed to address her formally as Her Majesty the Queen Consort Designate, an honorific title authorized by the Privy Council until a full coronation occurs. Royal watchers called it the quiet crowning. And yet, amid all the praise, one truth lingered beneath the ceremony. Every rise leaves a shadow. Camilla's confidantes claimed she felt increasingly isolated, excluded from strategy briefings and public correspondence. "She reads the papers every morning," said one aide. "She knows what's being written and what's not being written anymore." When Catherine and Anne met for the final rehearsal at Westminster Hall, they reportedly paused in front of the coronation chair, the same chair used by Charles III. Catherine touched its wooden frame and whispered, "It still belongs to him." Anne replied without hesitation, "And one day, it will belong to you. What matters is that you've earned it." That exchange, captured by a nearby camera crew and later broadcast worldwide, became the image of a monarchy reborn. One generation passing trust, not just power. As the lights dimmed over Westminster and preparations continued for the grand forum ahead, the narrative was no longer about transition. It was about transformation guided by a woman who wore the smallest crown in the room, yet carried the greatest weight of all. The day of the Commonwealth Youth Forum dawned with soft rain over Westminster, but inside the Great Hall, a quiet sense of history shimmered through the air. This was the first international royal event chaired entirely by Princess Catherine, with Princess Anne at her right, the monarch's sister, and now his steadfast proxy. New trumpets, new coronation robes. Catherine entered in a tailored ivory suit, wearing the smaller crown of service, its subtle gleam catching the light like a whisper of legacy. The symbolism was unmistakable. The monarchy reborn through grace, not grandeur. The room held delegates from over 40 nations, young innovators, cultural leaders, and faith representatives. When Catherine rose to speak, there was no speechwriter's detachment, only warmth and conviction. The Commonwealth is not bound by borders, but by belief that leadership begins in service. Applause, swelled, spontaneous, and sincere. Observers later said her delivery carried the ease of someone who had long been preparing for this moment. Even seasoned diplomats described it as a stateswoman's debut. The forum unfolded under her steady hand. Panels on education, women's rights, and sustainability replaced ceremonial toasts. Catherine listened more than she spoke, taking notes, asking direct questions, even stepping off the dais to join a youth discussion circle. Cameras captured her seated among students from Nairobi and Delhi, laughing softly as they shared their hopes. Beside her, Princess Anne looked on with restrained pride. "She has it." Anne was overheard telling a Foreign Office official, the rarest thing authority that asks for nothing. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla made her first public appearance in weeks, a low-profile visit to a literacy charity in Wiltshire. The timing, overlapping with Catherine's forum, drew inevitable comparisons. Where Catherine commanded global attention, Camilla's event passed almost unnoticed. Still, those close to her insist it was deliberate. "She wanted to show quiet dignity," said one aide, "but she also wanted London to remember she is still queen." That evening, as the forum concluded, Catherine closed with a statement that silenced the hall. "The crown's purpose is not to rule, but to remind us that compassion is power and humility is strength." The crowd rose in a standing ovation that lasted nearly 2 minutes. Reporters called it the speech of a generation. The next morning's headlines were unanimous. Queen Catherine leads the Commonwealth forward. Albracton. Within hours, Kensington Palace released a photo of Catherine and Anne clasping hands beneath the Commonwealth banner, the first official portrait of what many now call the dual guardianship. At Sandringham, King Charles reportedly watched the broadcast and smiled through tears. "She's not replacing anyone," he said quietly to Anne. "She's restoring what was nearly lost." And as night fell over London, one truth was undeniable. Catherine had not been crowned, but she had already begun to reign. By December, London was cloaked in frost and light. Yet, amid the glittering shop windows and carols echoing through Westminster, it was the quiet halls of Buckingham Palace that carried the season's most symbolic transformation. For the first time in living memory, the royal Christmas invitations were issued not from the Queen Consort's office, but from the office of the Prince and Princess of Wales. It was a small administrative change, but one that signaled a monumental shift. Within palace walls, even the courtiers whispered, "The center of gravity has moved." King Charles remained at Sandringham, where doctors advised continued rest. Though still sovereign, his public appearances had been drastically reduced. The official statement spoke of a period of reflection and limited duties, but everyone understood its subtext. The king was retreating with dignity, allowing the next generation to lead. And lead they did. Princess Catherine, newly designated queen consort in practice, was placed in charge of organizing all royal Christmas events, from the annual carol service at Westminster Abbey to the Christmas Day walk at Sandringham. Her vision was modest but profound. Fewer processions, more participation. Instead of lavish decorations, the palace adorned its halls with children's handmade ornaments collected from hospitals across the UK. Even Princess Anne, usually stoic, admitted it felt different this year, as though the spirit of duty has found a softer voice. The centerpiece of the season was the service of reflection and renewal held at Westminster Abbey on December 23rd. The service was attended by senior royals, diplomats, and community representatives from across the Commonwealth. Catherine presided not from the throne, but from the same simple lectern used by Queen Elizabeth II during her final Christmas address. As she spoke, the choir fell silent. "We gather not only to remember what has been," she said, "but to renew what must endure faith, family, and the kindness that holds a nation together." All. Her voice was clear, almost ethereal against the vaulted stone. The smaller crown of service rested on a velvet cushion beside her, gleaming under candlelight. It was not worn, but displayed a symbol of restraint and of leadership by example. The image, Catherine standing in light, with the crown beside her, became one of the most shared photographs of the year. International media hailed her as the people's queen in all but name. Lie, but behind the harmony, another story quietly unfolded. Queen Camilla, now largely residing at Raymill House, spent Christmas privately with close friends and her son, Tom Parker Bowles. She declined the invitation to the Abbey service, citing health reasons, though insiders described her absence as strategic distance. She felt her presence would distract from the moment, said one longtime aide, but she also knew the age of co-reign is over. At Sandringham, King Charles followed the service on television. When Catherine's image appeared, he reportedly turned to Anne and whispered, "Your mother would have approved." Anne, in her usual brevity, replied, "Then so do I." In the following days, subtle but decisive adjustments were made to royal protocol. The Privy Council issued a directive recognizing the Princess of Wales as acting head of state for ceremonial functions, a position never before held by a non-reigning consort. While constitutional scholars debated its implications, the public seemed united in approval. On Christmas morning, the royal walk at Sandringham became an emotional spectacle. Crowds lined the route in near-freezing air, eager to glimpse the family. When William and Catherine emerged, flanked by George, Charlotte, and Louis, cheers erupted. Gone was the rigid distance that once defined royal pageantry. This was warmth, human, and immediate. Catherine paused several times to greet well-wishers, accepting flowers and cards. One elderly woman pressed her hand and said, "You already carry the crown, dear. You don't need to wear it." Later that afternoon, the couple hosted a private luncheon for volunteers, nurses, and soldiers' families, a gathering that replaced the formal royal banquet traditionally overseen by Camilla. "This is the monarchy we prayed for," one guest said tearfully. As evening fell, King Charles made a brief televised message from Sandringham, short, tender, and deliberate. "I wish to express my deepest gratitude for the devotion and compassion shown by my family, particularly by the Prince and Princess of Wales. In their example, we see the enduring heart of service." It was the closest thing to a public abdication the United Kingdom had heard in modern times. That night, the royal family gathered at Windsor for a small, private dinner. Anne, seated beside Catherine, raised her glass and said softly, "To new beginnings earned, not inherited." William nodded, his hand resting over Catherine's. Across the table, even the king smiled faintly, content that his legacy was safe. Outside, snow began to fall, the first white Christmas in years. And somewhere far away at Raymill, Queen Camilla watched the same snowfall from her window. Those close to her said she remained calm, even serene. "She knows what's done is done," one friend confided. "Her crown was borrowed from time. Catherine's was built from faith." As the bells of Westminster chimed midnight, the monarchy of Britain had quietly rewritten itself, not with ceremony or decree, but through one woman's steadfast grace. A monarchy reborn in empathy, a reign defined not by jewels, but by justice. A Christmas that crowned compassion as Britain's new tradition. And when dawn broke, the headline across every paper in the realm said what the world already knew: Catherine's era begins.